Well, I hope you enjoyed painting our banana and starting to put a background in, making it feel like it's a more complete painting. I think at this stage we're ready to progress to doing a proper finished painting of a still life, still sticking to the theme of fruit. And you may wish to change from working on oil sketching paper. I'm going to change, I'm going to work onto this small stretched, pre-stretched canvas, which is 30 by 22 centimetres. And you can see it's actually got a little edge to it, and there is a degree of flex and bounce in this, which will give it a different feel when you're painting on it. It's quite exciting. I love painting on stretched canvas. So that's the surface I'm going to choose. Pre-stretched canvases available lots of art shops and online, and you don't have to be exactly this size. Whatever size you feel comfortable with is absolutely fine. So let's make a start, look at the colours we're going to need and our challenge for this final painting, and see how we go from there. So here I set up a simple still life with several items to create our final painting. We've got the familiar lovely green apple and banana, and these beautiful dark red cherries with their fantastic little highlights on them, almost white, sort of white come silvery highlights. And then I've got a pot in the background, which gives it a bit of height to the composition, and also gives you a new challenge. So I shall take my favourite little 2B pencil and make a start. Now, what we need to ensure with this is that we decide where to put the pot. I don't really want the pot to be right in the centre of the composition. I want to leave a bit of space. And also we've got the apples going to come over here. So probably the pot, the lid of the pot needs to be towards 2/5 or even 1/3 of the way in, 2/5 of the way in. So I'm just going to mark my canvas up there so that I start to put the top of the pot, which is actually a square shape with a knob. So let's just think about the top of the pot's going to go into about there, and this comes down to here. There are two sides to it. So we'll go for there. We'll get a lid, approximate lid. Shouldn't be too worried about it at this stage. That's going to be the lid coming down there, coming down here. Then we've got this shape coming in. So it gives you something a little more challenging to draw. And you've got a curved side and a curved side there coming down. And then this side is almost straight at me, sort of slightly curved. Yeah, I can see a little bit more of that, so it's pretty straight coming down there to here. And on the bottom, again, we've got the square shape, so we'll bring that shape into there. Make it a little bit more that way. So I've sort of established where the pot is, which is quite large. And at the same time, I'm going to establish where this cloth is. I'm going to come down there. Right, we've got that in there approximately. Now, alongside and in front of it and coming about halfway up, so that gives me the scale for my apple, is about here, coming down to in front of it. So there's the apple going in there, about there. Everything is sort of judged as relative. The core of the apple is here, with the stem coming out, so that's to about there. So I can see that this is much further in front. Doesn't matter if you draw over it for the time being. We're going to paint over this anyway. And the banana, the front of the banana is down from the base of the apple. That's where the sort of top of the banana is. And then it curves slightly over the pot, but not very much, and right round. And in this case, almost out of the composition. I've got it's quite a big shape. I'm going to bring this a little bit fatter and longer down to there. Let's just bring this out a bit more. You can see how many lines I've got on this banana. I've got loads of lines. I'm not worried about this. This is just judging the shape. If you really wanted to erase it, you could use a little rubber to put into there. I don't think I'm going to worry about that. I'm just going to leave my hairy lines. And moving across, I can see that there's a stem which is about there for the cherry, and then there's a cherry here and a cherry behind it. We draw one over the other, so that one's going to be behind it. That one's got its stalk going out that way, coming in that way. Then there's a gap, and then I've got another cherry here with a bigger one in front of it here, and the stalk going up that way. And then there's one cherry on its own down here. Again, there's a little bit of a space. Look for the intervening gaps when you're doing your drawing. Look for these spaces here and here and get them all relative. So now I've got my composition, and looking in here, there's quite a big sort of dark fold in the fabric I can see here. And there's another fold coming down from the top to there in the background. So I'm just going to mark those in as lines, because the first thing to do on this painting is to paint in the background. Just check that this angle here is about the same as that angle. That was a little bit steep on the lid. There's another line in there. So just go back over your drawing and take your time to get this reasonably accurate. It's going to be a nice painting. It doesn't matter about perfection. No one's going to come along and say your pot isn't absolutely perfect, but it does need to look like a pot. Now, you may be worried that there's a lot of pattern on here on the actual painting. I'm going to show you a way of doing that without too much worry. We're going to do a sort of almost a slightly abstract interpretation of it, which will work better than trying to paint very accurate flowers on the side of this pot. So we have our drawing and we're ready to move on to the painting. So to begin with, I'm going to need a sort of beige colour for the background of this painting. So I'll take a little bit of the burnt sienna and plenty of white, because we're going to need to mix a fair amount of this. So a palette knife is best for mixing a larger quantity of paint. I know occasionally I mix my paint with brushes, and you probably shouldn't, but rules are there to be broken. So that's sort of a very pinky terracotta colour, not quite the colour I want. I want it a little bit cooler than that. So I'm going to take a bit of the blue to sort of take the edge, because you can think about burnt sienna as being a brown. You can also think about it as being a very dark version of orange, which would be complementary to the blue. And as you put that little bit of blue into your brown and white mix, into your burnt sienna and mix, just get away with adding a fair amount of blue. I don't know if you can see, it's starting to go a slightly grayer tone. And that's the colour that I want for my background. At the same time, there are some folds in this cloth, and we're going to need a bit of a darker colour for those. So I'm going to start again with the blue and the brown, so the cobalt blue and the burnt sienna, and that's very dark. It looks almost like a very dark, it's almost a black. I don't want it that dark. So at this stage, I'm choose to add a little bit of white. Add it carefully from the side so that you don't go too, I want to keep it fairly dark. I don't want it to, it's got to look a lot darker than that. It's going to be the dark fold in the fabric. That's probably plenty. I don't need that bit of white. Let's take that bit of white off. So there I've got a colour for the background, and I've also got a colour to help me create a feeling of one or two folds in the fabric. I'm going to be painting this with the large number 8 flat brush. So my brush is ready, my paints are ready. Let's make a start. So we're ready for our first brush marks on this painting. Now, I've spoken to you before and said that in general, with oils, you would paint from dark to light, from thinner dark paint to thicker light paint. And I marked in a couple of lines here. What I'm going to do first is take the darker of the two colours we mixed for the background. This is the sort of dark beige, and put that colour in there into that line. And then here again, we've got quite a dark fold coming in there. So I'm going to push that, but that goes right up to the side of the pot. Goes up there. There's a fold going up into that fabric as well. And it's a little bit darker down the edge, so we'll just put a little bit of darkness there, where the beige of the back cloth joins the sort of blue of the other. Not very much, but marking in those colours, and then wipe off the excess paint. Clean your brush if you wish, but there's no need to do that. So now we'll take the lighter colour and paint this area, starting to put this lighter colour in for the background. When you're painting in this background, use a generous amount of paint and be quite confident in your brush strokes. I'm keeping the brush on the canvas surface most of the time and blocking in nice big broad strokes. You can see where the paint has gone a bit dry brush. That's where I haven't really put enough paint on. So you may find that you'll need to mix more colour as you go along, but take your time with this stage and just mixing, putting the paint in around your, approximately around the shape of the pot. Up there. Bringing the brush strokes in different directions rather than just flat. So you've even got a little bit of texture there. You can see it's gone a slightly more pink. That's where the colour hasn't been fully mixed on the palette, and that doesn't really matter. A little variety of the colour is nice. So I'm having to mix a little more of this colour as I'm going along, so the colour will be slightly different to put into this section. I put a little bit more blue in the mix, so I've got a slightly bluer grey colour on here. Gives it a bit of variety. This is where you can see that we've got quite a lot of background, but it's useful that I have made the subject fill the canvas. Don't have this subject just very tiny in the middle and then a massive amount of background, because it's a painting of the fruit and the vase. It's not really a painting just of the background cloth. At this stage, I've blocked in the light and the dark areas. I'm not going to clean my brush. You can see the brush is still fairly loaded with paint, but I am going to dip it back into the, if I show you, I'm dipping it back across into the darker brown and almost mixing the two for a sort of mid-tone. I come down the edges of this cloth here and bring that dark out so that it sort of looks more like a fold. So it's got a dark centre and then a little edge to it. And again here, we'll bring a bit more of the mid-tone onto the edges of this dark area, painting back into it to think about it being a fold. In fact, we could have another little ruck there by just putting a bit of black. This is very loose painting. It's not accurate. It's just giving you an idea of there are folds and movement in the fabric. At this stage, this is going to, we want this to be an interesting background, but not to dominate. What needs to dominate is the fruit. So just put those little marks in, cut a bit brown down the bottom there, and we finish. We've got our background cloth painted in. And so I've just topped up the blue and add a little bit more white. I'm going to leave these brown beige colours here and then move down and mix a blue colour for the cloth in the foreground. So it's mainly going to be cobalt blue, not quite that dark, so put a little bit of white into it. But that colour on its same is just a pale blue, not quite that pale. And it's not really, there's more of a mauve in this colour. I'm going to take a little bit of the violet and mix it into that blue to give it a slightly more violet look. And I think that's going to be a nicer colour for the cloth. It's going to sit very well with the sort of acid green apple and the yellow of the banana, both colours which are sort of towards complementary to violet. I think this is going to work really well. But again, that's my pale violet, so that's mainly cobalt, a little bit of violet and a touch of white. And then I'm going to mix a shadow colour. So take the violet here with a little bit of blue, keep it sort of bluey, so it's not quite pure violet. We need a bit more blue than that. But this colour is very strong, and I'm not sure it's quite going to work as a shadow colour. So I add a tiny, tiny bit of lemon yellow. And look, it's only a very tiny bit of lemon yellow. And that tiny bit of lemon yellow, or maybe a tiny bit more lemon yellow, just turns the violet slightly brownish, slightly dull. And that's what I want for the shadow colour. Again, because you're mixing the complementary of yellow into the violet, and it just softens it off a bit. I've cleaned my brush. We've got the colours mixed. I'm going to start again with the darker shadow colour and just bring in some darker shadow colour into that. Darker shadow colour looks a little bit too dark. I'm going to add a little bit of white to it. It's just a bit too dark and too purple. I'm going to bring that dark tone into there and around the base of this vase, the bottom there and the top of the banana, where I can see the light coming over here, where I can see that's going to be more shadow. Remind myself that it's going to be a little bit of shadow around these cherries. Just a little bit in there and underneath that bit. And in fact, there's a little bit of dark up the edge of the cloth there. That'll be enough. And then we've actually got a couple of folds in this cloth. So I'm just going to bring a little zigzag of shape there and another little shape here. Let's bring that across. I need a bit more. The paint's not flowing. Dip into your thinner, whether that's white spirit you're using or if you're using odorless thinner or Zest It. Just put a little bit of effect there that might be a shadow on the cloth, and don't forget those cherries. They will have a little bit of shadow. This is just a reminder marks really at this stage. Yeah, that'll do. Clean the brush and start to fill in the rest of the cloth with the main colour of the cloth, which is this quite nice bright blue. Quite a bright colour. It's a little bit too, if it feels too bright, add a little bit of white. If it feels not quite blue enough, put a little bit of your cobalt blue in it. It's your painting and you are choosing the colours that you use. I'm just going to put that into there. Don't worry about painting it. Paint it in and around the fruits. At this stage, I'm painting it I'll just bring this canvas up a notch. You can see there. You can see better at the bottom. Just fill that in there and here. And this lovely big number 8 brush is ideal for this. You can get some really big marks and brush strokes going in. You find that you need a fair amount of paint on the brush. That just comes down to that banana shape a bit better. Bring this around and enjoy getting the canvas covered and feeling that it's beginning to look like you've got a painting in progress rather than just the drawing outline on here. We're now getting plenty of paint onto the canvas. Get all of that blue. Remix a little bit of colour because I'm running a bit low. And when you, as I say, when you remix the colour, you'll often get a slightly different shade. Don't worry about that. That's fine. It makes all these marks that I'm doing, I'm letting them be quite visible. Around there. I've lost the cherry shape a little bit, but we can put that in later. So you've now got 2 colours. And again, I want to take a little bit of the slightly darker, the shadow colour, and mix it into the blue so that I'm taking that across. So I'm making a sort of a halfway house to soften the edges of these shadows. And you can take a dirty brush and paint into them because it's shadows in cloth. It's not another separate thing. It's all one cloth. So you don't want it to be too different. Just bring those brush strokes in. And you see that little bit of dark there gives us a feeling of there's some texture in the fabric. And now we've got, by varying that, you can see we've got quite an interesting surface. There we are. I'm quite pleased with that. So take your time with this to blend all the colours together, but don't be too fussy and very neat. Use your hand, move your hand around, make some bold marks. So now we've got the background and the foreground sort of, or the cloth that the fruit is sitting on, all complete. And we're ready to move on, to change our brush and to move on to painting the actual subject of the still life. So the first area we want to do is to paint this vase. Now the light I'm going to bring coming in from this top side because it's lighting the top of the apple, it's lighting this top of the banana. So I want this side of the vase and this top of the vase to be paler, and this area of the lid and this area of the vase is going to be in shadow. At this stage, we're going to paint this vase white, but it won't be pure white. So let's have a look at the 2 colours we need to mix to make this 3D effect. We need to mix a very pale but not absolutely white colour
for the sunny side of the vase, a bright colour, and then we'll need a darker shadow side for the other side. So I'm going to take a little bit of the blue, a little bit of the cobalt, not too much, to start with, to mix the very pale blue, because most shadows contain quite a lot of blue. So I'm going to mix a very pale blue, and that looks very pale. I'm going to tint it slightly grey, and the way to tint it slightly grey is to put a tiny bit of burnt sienna into the mix. It's almost like we're mixing a very similar colour to our background beige, but it's a lot lighter. And that's going to be a light. Okay, so hang on a minute, this is the light side. Yeah, I think that's going to be quite enough for the light side. And then we just want to do a stronger version. So take a bit more blue, a little bit more of the burnt sienna, but keep it, see, that's gone too brown in the mix. Wipe that off. Add more blue. You need it to be more, it's got to be a blue shadow. And that is a lot grayer. Getting a little bit too, not quite, it's too dark. So adjust it. You can tell how dark, if that's going to be my light colour, then the shadow size of the vase is going to be a darker grey. But we're painting essentially a white vase. So I don't want it to be too dark. So now we've got, you see how this looks almost white? It isn't white, but it looks white. And then I've got a dark, so I've got the light grey and the dark grey. And for the actual markings, the actual blue of the vase, we're going to go with the cobalt blue, but probably still with a little bit of white in it to make it not too strong. So we've got a paler blue colour there. And we'll just mix that up. That's mainly cobalt blue with a little bit of white. So now we're ready to paint our first section of the vase. Because this vase is quite large, I'm going to stick to using the number 8 brush for this initial stage. Starting with the shadow colour, the shadow grey that we've mixed, and take some big bold marks. So load your brush with plenty of paint and take the shape straight down in one big long sweep. And again here, just bring that down. That gives us a lovely flat surface, which is what we want for this initial part of the vase there. And the same on the lid. Come down here and just mainly to turn the brush onto its edge to do that, and just bring that in. So we've got a shape there that's shadow, and a shape of shadow. There's going to be some dark in there for the line. You can see how that's beginning to give you the shape of the vase straight away. Clean the brush and do the same using the light grey, the very light colour that we mixed for the sunlit side. So it will look almost white. It isn't pure white, but it will look white. So we can then bring this shape into here for the lid, and another line there. And then this shape comes down here. Again, bring that shape out. Bring the brush strokes as much as you can to a bold shape. Yes, you're going to have to cut a little bit around the apple. It's not going to be perfect. That gives us our first shape of the vase, the first bit of the shadow. Now, if you think about it, there's going to be a little bit of light on this rim, and there's going to be a little bit of dark on there. So take the dark grey from this side and put a little line in there, and then take the light grey on this side and put a little bit of light in there. And that should just give you the feeling of the, I just smudged it slightly there, gives you the feeling of the vase and its lid, which is separate. In fact, there needs to be a second line there, and there you can see we've now got a shape that resembles the lid. To do the top knot, just don't forget there's a little bit of top knot on here, which we haven't done. That's going to be in shade as well on that side, and it's going to be lighter on there, but actually looking at the vase, that's blue. So we've put it in shadow, but we're going to be doing that in blue. And you can see just by painting those flat shapes, we've got an impression of that vase with its lid. So we can finish off the vase. I've mixed up the blue colour. Remember, we put cobalt blue with some white in it. Change your brush so that we've now got the number 4 round. We've got the fine detail brush, and put a little bit of blue on the top there, not on the shadow side. We'll just do that on the light side of the lid to start with. And then on the sunlit side, where you've got all these patterns, hold the brush a long way back, make sure you've got plenty of brush paint loaded onto the tip, and don't press too hard, because what we want to do now is just want to put some little light descriptive squiggles. And again in here, let the brush flow around and put 1 or 2 little squiggly marks into your vase. Not too many, but enough to give you the feeling that it's got a pattern on it. And that's all you need to do on there. Little bit of squiggle. We mix the cobalt blue with white. So go into the neat cobalt blue onto your palette, just pure cobalt blue, because you need a darker version, and do the same on the shadow side. We've got some little squiggly marks. Just have a bit of fun with this and enjoy putting a few squiggly marks onto the side. If we tried to paint this in fine detail, it would get very photographic and you lose that looseness of the vase. So now we're saying we're putting a little bit more blue. Put a little bit more blue in there. The more you press in with your brush, the more you press, the more the colours will mix, and you'll lose the blue and you'll just get a dark grey smudge. So try to keep your paint flowing off the tip of your brush, and try to keep your hand light pressure. Now, just to finish off, we've got some lines on this actual lid. So in here, I want to put a couple of blue lines with the dark blue on there, not forgetting to put the very dark blue on that side of the lid. So we've got the top knot in 2 shapes. In fact, I've lost a little bit of the shape there, so you can go back with your light, just bring that in. And then don't forget, if you're going to put the dark stripe there, it's going to have to use the lighter blue on this side. So everything on this side has got the lighter blue, everything on this side is painted with the darker blue. And you should then have a relatively, just see where that's not quite got enough background. You should now have a believable shape to your vase. Yeah, there are a few little white bits where the background needs neatening up. At this stage, it's important to just keep painting. Enjoy the process, and we can always go and neaten these little bits up afterwards. We've kept the colours of the background, so we've got that paint. It's oil, it stays wet. It's not like acrylics where it's gone dry in seconds. So now we can move on to painting the fruit. I'm going to take a colour which is pretty much half and half, lemon yellow and viridian green. So I've got a bright green, very bright green. And the first thing I'm going to do is just paint the whole apple bright green. So what I'm doing here is we're just taking that bright green, putting the brush strokes across and starting to block in the whole shape with what we would call the local colour. This is the apple is green. We know the apple is green. We can see it's green. So I painted the whole apple in green. And then to darken the shadow side, we put a tiny little bit of a little bit more of the viridian green and a tiny bit of red, cadmium red, onto your brush, and that gives you a darker colour, so that you can then put a little bit of darkness into the centre of the apple there. Oh, it's a little bit too much red. Too much red, it'll go black, and a little bit of shadow on that side. But there's not very much shadow up. It's quite bright. You can just see how you can blend that in and give your apple a little bit of colour, a little bit of shadow. Clean the brush, dip it into the pure yellow and put some strong highlight, put some light colours on there. And you can build by adjusting the colour, the light colour and the dark colour on top of the green apple. So you can see this is putting wet colour on top of wet paint. So when you do that, you need very little pressure through your hand. You're learning to paint what's called almost an alla prima, wet into wet. And then finally, we've gone from the dark, I've got some yellow, and I've dipped the end of the brush into the white. So finally, I'm just putting some little bits of very, very bright, and there's another little very bright patch there in the bottom of the apple. Just a little bit of highlight to give it some life. Not forgetting, of course, that this apple's got a stalk. Take your round brush with a little bit of burnt sienna right in the middle of this dark area we've got here, and flick in the stem for the apple into the centre of that dark. There we are. That may seem a little bit too dark. I don't know. You can always blend it. We can come back and put our little highlight on a bit more. Have fun with this and adjust it, and build your confidence actually handling the paint. Don't worry about, you know, things being, see, I'm thinking that needs to be a little bit lighter around there. Just enjoy the feeling of handling the paint to create your apple shape. If at any stage you think you've overdone it, you can always blend it and always wipe it off again. It's not it's not set in stone. We can always go back to our green and soften, you know, you could blend that a bit more so that it's not quite such a distinctive light and dark. If you want to, you could blend that over and say, well, that's a bit harsh. I just want to soften that off. Just take your brush and blend the colour. It's your painting. That's how you can manipulate, you know, that's how you will gradually start to develop your own way of putting the paint onto the picture. So we've blocked in the apple, we've blocked in the thing. We've now got a banana and these 5 cherries to put in. For the banana, we need to again mix some different yellows. And if you remember, we take the lemon yellow and add a little bit of cadmium red, make a slightly more orangey yellow. So we've got, I'll show you on here, we've got, it's gone a little bit too orange at the moment. I've got my lemon yellow and I've made an orange, which is a little bit strong, and then into the shadow of the lemon, of the banana, we put a little bit of the violet. By putting a bit of violet into there, you get a much browner. You see that sort of like a mustardy colour, which is sort of dark banana. Banana needs a little bit more white and a little bit more yellow, and the bright yellow. So we've got those same colours that we used when painting the banana in the earlier lesson. And again, I've got shapes here. I can see that's the shadow. So that's, I'm going to put my dark banana colour in there, and maybe even a little bit down the bottom, because the sun's coming over there. So that little bit of the banana's in shadow. Take the slightly orangey colour. I'll need more lemon yellow in mine. It's a little bit too orange. The red's very strong. So when the red is very strong, it very quickly turns to a bright orange. You don't want that for banana. Orange bananas are generally more yellow in colour. And again, take the brush strokes straight along to the end, giving you plenty of shape on the fruit. And at the front, there's a little bit, it's actually a bit darker, so I'm just going to go back with the dark shadow colour, and there will be some black going in there. And then on the very top of the banana, I'm taking my lemon yellow and white and just putting a little bit of light colour right on the top there, on that section. That looks like it needs a bit of light just to there. So take your time. Go back. I mean, I'm thinking actually there's a little bit of more shadow coming on that side. This is plain. We haven't put any markings on this banana yet. We're just trying to get the feeling of the shape of it, and which is the brighter yellow side and which is the darker side. Once you've done that, then you can pick up your little round brush and choose either to use burnt sienna, but I'm going to use the orangey yellow with the purple, and I'm going to mix up, put a bit more. I'm going to make this even darker by adding more mauve, more violet into my yellow. And look, that's going almost like a brown colour. Looks like a good colour for making the markings on the banana. And there's a bit of dark on here. And just look at the fruit in front of you and put some of the lines. If the banana's been sitting around for a while and it's got a lot of brown on it, then maybe don't consider putting all of the brown marks on it. This one's got a few little dots on it, and it's got quite a distinct line coming down to the tip. And there's a few little marks in there, but I don't want quite as many marks as perhaps there is on the actual fruit. It can look a bit too fussy. Take your time and make some choices as to what you're going to actually use and what you
what you think I might leave out. There is a funny line then, there is quite a dark bit there. But I think that's probably enough. Yes, I think that's enough markings. If I do too much, it's going to look too fussy. So for me, that's probably 2/3 of the markings I actually see I put on the banana. These cherries are a very dark sort of burgundy colour, and I've transferred my paints yet again onto a new palette in the same way as I showed you earlier, so that I've got a bit more space to move. Now, looking at the cherries, they are quite, let's just take a cherry and put it onto the, there we are, let's put it onto the palette. They are quite a deep mauve colour, but there's something more in there. I think if we try a little bit of burnt sienna into the mauve and just see where that colour goes. No, that's going too brown. So we'll go back to that. That's not working. The mauve was, the violet colour was probably better. Put a tiny bit of blue into the violet and see if that's more like the colour. That looks more like the colour of the cherry. So it's more like the violet and blue. You're going to need to experiment when you, especially when you start painting other subjects, to take a colour. So I think the violet and the blue makes a better colour than the violet and the burnt sienna. These cherries, I'm going to use the round number 4 brush, because obviously they're quite small and we need to get them painted accurately. Using the colour we've just mixed, which was the violet with a little bit of cobalt blue, I'll start by painting the shape, painting around the shape to sort of give it a feeling of life, even though it's just a round cherry. And we had 2 cherries here next to each other. In fact, in all my eagerness to paint the background, I've painted out one of the cherries, so we'll paint it back in again. And then the 3rd cherry was down here. And just starting to get an approximate shape. They're not quite rounded, but at this stage, I'm just going to get something that will resemble my cherry shape on each of these. And again over here, that one was behind, so we'll put that one in first. And then this cherry here. That's looking okay. We'll get that a little bit. I think these cherries could go a little bit bigger. So this one could be a bit, and this one could be a little bit bigger. Having put a first colour on, you can see that the background, there's too many gaps around the background. So at this stage, it's handy to go back to your background colour and bring it in. Now, it's 2 ways. We can either go and dip into the colour that you've got on your the reserved from the colour of the cloth, or sometimes you can just take a wet brush and just dip it into dip it into the area, the paint nearby, and just pull it across. So we can take a little bit of the blue colour, which is still wet, and stretch it slightly using a brush that's loaded. Put a bit of white spirit or thinner on your brush and drag that colour across to fill in the gaps. And only do this to a certain degree. See where the colour's gone a little bit thin there. So I'm going to have to stop and use the actual paint, apply some more paint. Dipping my brush back into the colour. We can add more paint and just bring these shapes and get rid of that sort of white hairy edge. So you can see the value of either having a much bigger palette where you've got space for all your colours, or if you're using the tear off one, don't throw the torn off bits away until you've finished your painting, because those little bits of colour that are left over are quite useful. Right, I've got the basic cherry shape, but the cherry itself has got a beautiful highlight on it. So take some white paint, but take the white paint here and a tiny little bit of the cherry colour, and then you get a lovely cherry highlight. Well, that's not going to work. Dip your brush into the white and then just slightly into the cherry colour, so you've got an off-white colour. Now here's where you're going to have to observe quite carefully where the highlights are on the cherries. I can see a little bit there on that one. This one's less. This one's got an area almost where the stem's coming in, and it's got a little bit of light on there. The more you press, of course, the more of the cherry colour will come and the less highlight you will have. Again, here there's a little highlight on the top and a shape in there where the stem will come out in a moment. And this one too has got a little bit of light on the top there. Not too much, just a little bit to give the cherries a shine. But the stem of the cherry is paler, so burnt sienna will not do it. So I'm taking the burnt sienna and putting a little bit of lemon yellow into it to get a lighter, sort of more golden colour, which will then act as a lovely shape for these cherry stalks. And really, you'll try and do a single brush stroke. Let's get a bit more paint on the burnt sienna with quite a lot of lemon yellow in the mix. And just take that up there. If you press on too hard, you will get a very thick line. And you want these cherry stalks are quite thin, so you don't want them to be too long, too heavy. The heavier you press on, the thicker the mark you will make, the broader the stroke. We've got a lovely little stem here, and there's another one coming out there. There we are. And we've got our cherry stalks sitting in. That yellow colour, that burnt sienna and yellow would give a little bit of light on the top of our apple stalk. So let's just add a touch of that while we've got it on the brush. So at this stage, we have completed the background and all of the fruits and some texture into the fabric. And I just want to spend some time now, a little bit of neatening. We've got quite a few sort of what I would call furry edges here. So I'm going to take the colours, starting with the background, go back to the colour that you reserved and just think, well, add a little bit more colour into here. And just neaten this edge off a bit. There might be a bit more of that going in. And blend in any areas where you feel I needed to add a little bit more paint. I've sort of missed a bit. So into the edge of the apple, perhaps around there. And take a little bit of the lighter colour from the background and just bring it in to get this shape. So you're painting what's almost called a negative shape. You're painting the background and just bringing that back in to sharpen up the shape. If you're doing that, you need a fairly loaded brush and again a relatively light touch with your hand. Oil painting is not sort of a heavy-handed thing. You've got to be quite delicate with it at times. So I'm just going to brush that in. Again, blend in a little bit of blend. This paint will all blend because it's all wet. It's one of the joys of oil paint, is that you can take your time to blend it and come back to it, go and have a coffee, have a think, come back to it. You've got all day with oil paint. You haven't got to keep rushing. Do the same with the cloth. So we'll just come back down into my blue. And again, just adding a little bit. So there, that's a little bit, needs neatening a little bit here and on the base of the vase. Not too much. I think most of this I'm relatively happy with. I'm not going to worry. I don't worry about the odd little tiny bit of unpainted canvas. I quite like that. It gives it a bit of texture, a bit of character. But just to neaten it off a little. And then finally, go back to your shadow colour from the cloth. It's this sort of, well, we put the purple and we put a tiny little bit of lemon yellow in it to make it really dark. And think carefully about these shadows that you had on the cherries. For instance, we did have some cherry shadows here, and they've sort of disappeared in the painting process. So I want to put those back in and just bring that dark back into there. I feel there could be a little bit of dark down the side there on the banana to help it sit onto the surface of the cloth. So yeah, just one or two little shadows, not too much, but just a little bit there, in there and in here. You may even need the smaller brush. I mean, I'm doing this with the number 4 filbert, the long filbert. but if you find that brush is too big, then use a smaller one, use the small round. Just to bring in a few extra little shadows and help the whole painting come together. Be careful not to overdo it at this stage, but a few minutes spent neatening and finishing anything off that doesn't look quite right will brings your painting to a finished state. And I think that is now in a nice completed state of the painting. So I hope that you've enjoyed the experience of making your first paintings in oils, and perhaps you will join me in one of my other videos as we move on to paint other subjects. You can enjoy more videos by going over to my website and also various free video clips on my YouTube channel for you to enjoy.